Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the May 26th meeting of the Development and Finance Committee of the Housing Opportunities Commission. I'm Jackie Simon, the chair, and my fellow commissioners on the committee are to my left, Rick Nelson, and to my right, Jeffrey Merkowitz. We thank you for your attendance today on the start of a long weekend, and an important one at that. We have just two items this morning: the approval of our minutes of our April 21st committee meeting. And may I have a motion to approve them as circulated, or are there?
So moved. Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. The minutes are approved as circulated. We have a single item today, kind of carryover from our last meeting, and it's a significant one from the point of view of many of us, and that is a discussion of a refinance plan for our scattered site units, which are among our largest units and the ones that are most geographically dispersed throughout the county. And a keystone of the Housing Opportunities Commission's concept from its inceptions. And I am delighted to see the additional work and what it has produced. And so we'll move to that subject discussion again. Ms. Andrews, maybe you would like to introduce it further?
Yes, thank you so much, Madam Chair, commissioners, members of the public, and the HOC team. Today, we will present to you a recommendation related to refinancing a portion of our scattered sites. As the committee knows, as well as the commission, we as staff have been doing a very holistic, comprehensive review of our close to 2,000 scattered site units. Today's presentation will focus solely on a refinance plan for a portion of those scattered sites, 808. However, we will be returning to the board with a more comprehensive recommendation related to the remaining scattered site portfolio, in addressing questions such as what and how we should go about addressing capital needs, and what some recommendations may be related to the remaining portfolio. We have taken the feedback that we received from this committee, the questions, and have had ample opportunity to evaluate options, and would like to present to you our recommendation based on that extensive review. And I will turn it over to Monty Stanford, our Director of Mortgage Finance, and his team to walk us through this presentation.
Thank you, Executive Director Andrews. Good morning, Commissioners. Nice to see you again. For the record, Monty Stanford, Director of Mortgage Finance. Mortgage Finance is pleased today to provide you with this presentation on the scattered sites financing. As you know, the portfolio was acquired through a variety of methods over the years, including RAD Section 8 dispositions and the right of first refusal. Through various instrumentalities, HOC owns over 1,700 scattered site units across Montgomery County. And as you are aware, they serve, as you stated, Commissioner Simon, a major public purpose in helping HOC meet its mission, in that the majority of the households being served earn between 30 and 80% of the area median income. And most are larger townhouses serving families. Staff is developing a two-phase comprehensive plan that addresses the refinancing of select properties, which Jeremiah will discuss in more detail, and a second phase for the redevelopment of the balance of the portfolio. In today's presentation, Mortgage Finance will address concerns raised by commissioners in the last Development Finance Committee and discuss the scattered site financing plan being proposed in more detail. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Jeremiah Battle.
Thank you, Monty. Good morning, Commissioners. For the record, Jeremiah Battle, Senior Multifamily Underwriter, Mortgage Finance. The next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, so as you're familiar, in December 2017, as far as the history of the financing, VPC 1 and 2 were approved for a 5-year loan from PNC. That loan matured in December of 2022, was extended to August of 2023, was a $52 million facility. Several challenges exist that impact the development of the overall comprehensive plan, including the inability to execute a LIHTC transaction. Some of the properties are unable to support themselves individually. There are some impacts around policy changes around evictions that we took into consideration, and also some operational efficiencies that will be gained from a reduction in arrearages and bad debt. As Monty and Director Andrews mentioned, this is phase 1 that we are looking at tackling the refinancing of select scattered sites. So therefore, originally 1,038 units were considered. However, upon review, 808 were included in the final plan as they were deemed to have generated sufficient net operating income to support the financing. The remaining 230 are not recommended for the financing, given that they only represent 3% of the existing outstanding debt and generate only 8% of the overall NOI as of March of this year. So the proposed plan includes VPC 1, VPC 2, Scattered Sites 2, and Montgomery Homes Limited Partnership, also known as MHLP 10, totaling $64.9 million, which is comprised of a permanent loan backed by the pledge of the Commission's GO and funded with governmental bonds issued within the multiple purpose indenture, which will repay the existing debt of the ownership entities. Also is comprised of existing reserves held by PNC and existing replacement reserves held by the 4 entities. So the following projects highlighted in blue make up the core scattered sites that are included. So as I mentioned, VPC 1 and 2, 679 units total. Scattered Sites 2, 54 units, and MHLP 10, 75 units. Also shown on this slide are the senior debt on those entities, as well as the HOC and county level debt. So we received proposals from Jeffries, from PNC, and from Bricadia. So we have determined that the most advantageous structure, both financially and fiscally, is HOC's issuance of tax exempt and taxable bond proceeds to fund the mortgage 35-year. The NOI of $5.2 million supports. Same slide, please. On that same page, it explains that the NOI supports permanent mortgage of $59.6 million with an estimated 4.95% blended interest rate and achieves a debt service coverage ratio of 1.45. So we are recommending that the Development and Finance Committee join in recommendation of the following actions: approval of refinancing plan for VPC 1, VPC 2, Scattered Sites 2, and MHLP 10. Approval to select Jeffries among the Commission's bond underwriters as the senior manager for the upcoming bond issuance. Adoption of a bond authorizing resolution for the issuance and delivery of tax exempt and taxable indebtedness within the multipurpose indenture in an aggregate principal amount not to exceed $61 million to fund a permanent loan for the transaction and up to $60 million. And approval of a cost of issuance budget estimated to be approximately $750,000 to be funded by bond proceeds. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the properties included in the current proposed financing plan of 808 units. It shows the existing PNC debt reserves in the first row, and it shows the HOC and county level debt, as well as the outstanding senior debt, and the NOI that's supporting the debt that we're proposing. So we have met with staff from real estate, property management, asset management, as well as the budget office to coordinate this due diligence process. On page 8, you'll see our underwriting assumptions, and as you can see here, so the $5.2 million is the NOI that we're using to size the debt, and we sized to a 1.45 debt service coverage ratio to give us sufficient cushion to operations, and to not adversely impact HOC's fiscal position or its budget. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we received quotes from Berkadia and PNC, and we measured them against an HOC bond issuance structured by Jefferies. So with the help of our financial advisor, Kane Mitter, they've assisted with a comparative analysis, and we eliminated Berkadia's options upfront, given that the fact that they included a 5, a 7, and a 10-year balloon. So that was we're seeking long-term financing, so those are the reasons that Berkadia were eliminated upfront. And then also PNC options included a variable and a swap, which staff believes should be set aside for transactions that do not have better options, but are highly important to the commission. And 25-year fixed rate private placement option required a higher cost of issuance, as well as the funding of a debt service reserve. So therefore, we selected the option that's shown on page 10. If you can move to the next page, please. Highlighted in the green border. So we held constant in all scenarios that we're going to size the tax exempt refunding to refund the existing tax exempt debt. And we used the NOI from trailing 12 operations, $5.2 million, to support the tax exempt debt needed to refund existing tax exempt debt. The remaining NOI is down below in the taxable portion, which sized to a combined annual debt service of $3.6 million and a total bond amount of $59.6 million. Next slide, please. So with those bond proceeds, we are anticipating paying off existing debt for VPC 1, VPC 2, Scattered Sites 2, MHLP 10, as well as HOC and county debt. Should note that the net balance gap surplus, that row should be slid over one column to the right. So the net balance gap surplus for the option that we're proposing is actually the $4.7 million. That's to the left of that green border. Below that, equity cost of contribution cost of issuance, $750,000, producing a net cash before financing fees to HOC of $3.98 million. Next slide, please. So the total sources and uses includes new anticipated senior loan, the existing PNC reserves that will be returned to the FHA risk share reserve, existing replacement reserves held by the 808 units to be used as a source and the use. And the uses are to repay the existing debt. As I mentioned, source and the use existing reserves. And the financing fees are comprised of cost of issuance as well as a commitment fee to HOC, producing a financing gap surplus that's below. Next page, please. So the issues are for consideration. Does the Development Finance Committee wish to join staff's recommendation to the commission to approve refinancing plan for VPC 1 Corporation, VPC 2 Corporation, Scattered Sites 2 Development Corporation, and Montgomery Homes Limited Partnership, totaling $64.9 million. Selection of Jefferies among the commission's bond underwriters and senior manager for the upcoming bond issuance, adoption of a bond authorizing resolution for the issuance and delivery of tax exempt and taxable indebtedness in an aggregate principal amount not to exceed $61 million to fund a permanent loan for a transaction of up to 60 million, and approval of cost of issuance budget estimated to be approximately $750,000 to be funded by proceeds. The debt service, as far as the budget and fiscal impact, the debt service of the new proposed permanent financing is an increase of approximately $400,000 when compared to the proposed FY 2024 budget. However, previously imposed annual debt service reserve contributions for VPC 1 and 2 will be removed, which has the potential to result in increased cash flow annually to HOC. Staff will continue to work with the budget office to determine the accounting mechanics of the cash flow to HOC and incorporate the impacts of the permanent financing in future FY 2024 budget amendment. Costs are associated with closing will be paid from the projected cost of issuance budget. So the staff recommendations are a repeat of the items listed on the previous slide. I want to thank my colleagues for their collaboration within mortgage finance and as well as the other divisions, and at this point open for any questions.
Thank you very much. I feel like we've just gotten off the racetrack. Lots of information very quickly. Comments?
Well, I guess first question I would have is, I'm not sure I fully understand how we or why we reached the conclusion that we'd only do the 800 versus the full 1,000. If I read it correctly, the other couple hundred are not self-sufficient, which means that we've really created a class of properties that are losers from the beginning in terms of financial impact. So, I mean, that's going to be a problem down the road. If they were aggregated with the other 800, wouldn't it mitigate some of those problems? I'm not fully understanding that, number one. So if we can start with that.
I'll answer the second part of your question first. First part of the question. As it relates to the 230, many of the restrictions, what makes it hard for them to generate rent is because of the regulatory restrictions that exist on those. We can't raise the rents on those properties to a significant enough level where they would support any debt. And if we tried to attribute that income to the other property, would just tax the rest of the portfolio. That is, I mean, one of the reasons that, you know, we're trying to do an assessment on those 238 properties to decide exactly what their value is and whether what we should actually do with them in a disposition plan. So we agree with your assessment that, you know, they are a tax to the rest of the portfolio, but, you know, that's a result of the restrictions that they came with the regulatory.
I mean, I understand that, but the full package produces a cash flow to HOC, which could in fact be utilized to cover whatever shortfall these 200 create. And I asked those questions because, as I think Jackie indicated in her opening comments, one of the advantages of the scattered site portfolio is that this, in fact, accomplishes a major part of our mission of ensuring that we've got units spread throughout the county and that we've got units that accommodate larger families. And the implications here are that some good portion of the 200 probably will be determined to be disposed of, which is another issue and a problem. And I'm just not enthusiastic about that idea. I guess the other question I would ask, and mixing all this together, because in fact the scattered site portfolio is significant to HOC. Does HOC have a current map of the location of our scattered sites?
Yes, we do. We have a map as well as a heat map. We have retained services from a software company that has allowed us to even add on layers where we're able to gain additional insight in regards to everything from understanding who lives where, the demographics, where we're located, from what the current income levels are in the different areas, school zones. And so we are doing a comprehensive review of where we're located. And then there's the opposite map, which shows where we're not. And so this analysis and review that we're undergoing will allow us to make recommendations. Whatever the recommendation that would come before the commission would, of course, result in no net loss. So if there is a recommendation for any disposition, there might be a recommendation that dispose and purchase here, or dispose and reallocate there, and make sure that we do not lose any of what we have in our portfolio in terms of being able to serve the size families that we're serving. But we are looking so that we can ensure that we're serving across the county, and that we're also thinking about some of those strategic decisions that will come before the board in regards to where and why. I do want to indicate that of those 200 units that did not meet the requirements or the recommendations from my mortgage finance team to be included in this overall financing strategy and plan, we are going unit by unit to make an evaluation of what it would cost to get those units in a better financial posture so that we can make decisions on what to do moving forward. Does not mean that those units will be units that we do not keep in our portfolio, but because of the current amount of income that it generates, and because it was not significant enough to warrant putting in this financing plan and reducing our potential outcome in terms of cash flow, we decided to keep that portfolio, that small portfolio, aside as we do our unit by unit evaluation and thinking through what kind of investment we need to make. In some of our scattered sites, making that investment will change its posture and will ultimately put us in a different position in regards to what the recommendation will be. So it's not a complete set aside and or presumption that we won't be able to maintain and or keep those units. It's just in terms of this financing plan, not recommended that they be put in this financing plan at this time. And then remember, one of the aspects of the financing plan that we've also had to evaluate is what are the consequences if we needed to pull out various units along the way. So if we know up front that there are some units that we need to evaluate closer, we did not want to burden ourselves putting them in the financing plan only to realize that our recommendation is to do something different. And so we're undergoing that full assessment. Look forward to showing the board the software that allows us to make comprehensive analysis and a review of our scattered sites, and that work is currently underway.
Would, on those that we're holding out at the present time, by refinancing them in some other way, is it possible that we could be removing some of the restrictions on them by refinancing them differently? Or are the regulations and restrictions we're gotta live with?
We have to live with the restrictions. Most of the restrictions, I'll defer to Deputy Executive Director Kayreen Brown to get more.
Good morning. For the record, I'm Kayreen Brown, Deputy Executive Director. For some of the scattered sites, the restrictions we have to live with. And for others, we may have some flexibility, but for now, they are what they are. I would add to Executive Director's comments that some of the others were left out of this financing also because their net cash flow would not contribute anything meaningful to this financing. And so as we evaluate them and as we, work to improve operations in some regard, we're able to then make decisions about perhaps a later financing, depending on what decisions or what recommendations are made with respect to some of those. But with regards to the financing, there are some restrictions that we just have to live with that can't be lifted.
But aren't you creating a challenge in terms of the financing of this last group? I mean, because they have all these challenges, then by segregating them out, then isn't it going to be that much more difficult to have a financing plan for these 200 units?
Are some of them, do they have debt?
So they don't have debt.
Yeah.
And that was one of
some them
the other
have no
reasons they weren't
debt, So
included.
there's just revenue and expenses. And yeah, I think that's part of the decision.
Well, wait a minute, 100 of them have debt. Well, HOC debt, right? This shows 99, you've got,
So referring to Commissioner Nelson, referring to first mortgage debt,
Yeah.
when I
First
say that
mortgage
they
must
don't
be-
have debt, so was referring to first mortgage debt that they don't have, so that's why one of the other reasons they weren't included in the financing was that's to not put new debt on entities that don't have existing first mortgage debt. And to allow
First
for,
mortgage must pay debt. The subordinate HOC debt is at the commission's discretion as to whether it demands payments.
back to your comment about the software that we have. I'm glad to hear that. I mean, I remember the discussions with HOC and the planning department 10 years ago when we did some mapping to try to determine throughout the county where all of the assisted or project-based units were, whether they were HOC or otherwise. And it was semi-successful. But it sounds like you have moved a generation or two in advance. I think it would be a good thing to share that with the commission. I personally would like to be updated since we've made some changes in terms of where we're. And related to this, have you looked to see where these 200 are and what that does to that map?
We have not done that analysis in regards to the 200. We've been looking more holistically across our entire scattered site portfolio. So not yet, but based on your recommendation, we of course will take a closer look.
I mean, and I guess I understand that you're looking at it holistically, but if you're looking at it holistically, you, in addition to the financial aspect, you have to look at the purpose and what it's doing in terms of achieving our mission. And if there are any issues that pop up when we look at these in terms of the 200, and if in fact the decision is made that they might have to be disposed of or some of them, is that going to create some significant gaps?
Right.
Those are things that we ought to be
Of course.
looking at now in terms of making these kinds of decisions, because we seem to have made decisions that the 800 are good and they're in place for 35 years if they can last that long. The 200 are not, and I'm just.
Now, I guess I should make sure that I'm clear here. There's more than 200 that we are looking at in terms of the remaining balance of the scattered sites portfolio. So when you ask about the 200 that weren't included in this particular financing plan, there's actually, of course, many other scattered sites. Correct. So we're looking at the entire portfolio so that we can determine where do we have a concentration, where are we, the 808 will be identified as units that we've financed, which units didn't we include here, where are they located, and we will be making that comprehensive recommendation information as well as showing information that we gained from that assessment. But to carve out this 200 falls in the category of the remaining scattered sites as we're looking at our full portfolio so that we can make a comprehensive recommendation.
But you've also made the statement in here that the 669 are in fact already restricted.
So if, commissioners, if you look on your slide 5, it breaks out the ones in.
Can we get to slide 5 on
Go to slide 5 on the deck, please.
And it's page 11.
Page 11, yes. So in the top part of that table in blue, those are the units that are being considered for financing.
right?
And the 6, 7, and 9 include all of the VPC. So the 669 that you mentioned, those are the ones with the HUD use agreement, the section 18 disposition. The ones at the bottom in black, that starts with MPD 1 all the way down to MHLP 8. Those add up to the 230 units. Those have no first mortgage debt. There's a little bit of HOC financing on those. And we're going to be looking at those and determining what's the best outcome for those and bringing back discussion with the commission. It doesn't mean that we're necessarily disposing of those, but there are no restrictions on those units. There's no debt, and different decisions can be made that optimizes public purpose and other aspects of those units, and proceeds can be reprogrammed that meets our highest public purpose. And those, along with other units in the scattered site portfolio, can be evaluated together and brought back for discussion at the commission.
Well, I guess, and it's my confusion in reading the packet. We have a total of close to 1,800 scattered sites. And I thought when I read the packet that 669 were outside of this 1,000. But you're suggesting that's not the case. So therefore, we have 700 or close to 700 scattered sites that are not yet addressed.
Yeah.
Okay, that was not clear.
That was my confusion too.
That was not clear
Apologize for that.
in my reading of this packet. And let me also just tell you for future reference, at least from this commissioner, when and if we decide to dispose of some of these scattered sites, it's not just a case, in my view, of no net loss, but it would be a case, hopefully, of no net loss of scattered sites. In other words, if you decided to get rid of 100 scattered sites, I would not be supportive of that 100 being placed in some multifamily unit somewhere. Again, I go back to the mission of HOC in terms of having scattered opportunities for residents of the county. And I think it's very important to maintain that. So when and if we get to those discussions, at least my view would be that we would look to replacing any with something similar. Just let you know what my thoughts are on that.
Partially because our new growth is all being driven by multiple pressures to be at metro sites and high density. And the scattered sites provide a very different alternative of living and locational opportunity to be in rural parts of the county and so forth. So that is to me the precious aspect of these units. And so I would agree with Rick's assessment that it's not just a matter of not losing the number of units, but it's not losing the concept of individual townhouses wherever in the county they might be. So, but I think it was confusing to me to read off right out of the gate that we have 1,700 units And then nothing here totaled 1,700 units, and I kept wondering where the rest of it is. So I'm delighted that you have brought to us a comprehensive plan for these units that you are recommending we deal with. I am troubled again, for as long as I've been on the commission, at being at the crisis point of they have to be refinanced in 30 or 60 days. That we put ourselves in time pressures where I know that the staff has had to work overtime on this to have put this together and done this analysis in a situation where we're already stretched thin and we have vacancies, we have new staff on board, and we keep putting pressure on ourselves because we don't have a quota, a warning list, or if we could have had the discussion that we had last month in February instead of in April, I think it would have been a lot easier on everybody, because when it gets to us and we've got a deadline that these have to be refinanced by X date, we don't have the opportunity to do all of the data gathering we want to do. And this committee, for as long as I've been on the commission, has been asking for a heads up. So my hope is that we're going to be able to develop a list of things we know are deadlines. And you can come to us February and say, these are going to have to be refinanced on 6 months forward or 4 months. So let's talk about what's important. We have a lot of new staff on board, and there's not the institutional memory except for Rick and I. And it's important that new staff have the opportunity to understand the philosophy, the concepts, why this is important to us. And I think the staff was perhaps surprised at how important the committee feels about this particular program. And we know of the challenges managing it and supervising it, maintaining it, and all of that, but it has such a premier, excuse me, such a premier value that we can't be making decisions about them under pressure. And I think the staff, by not bringing it ahead, and I'm not trying to be critical about this, but I think this is a classic example of a lesson that can be well learned, that can help all of us, staff and commission, not feel under the gun that the committee has expressed in the past, that we feel under sometimes of the pressures where mortgages have to be refinanced. We had the Westwood Towers situation where there was a lot of time pressure. That I just worry about the staff being so, having to be pulled off what you're doing that's a full-time job, and then having to go back and with very little time do a tremendous amount of work to pull something to us. So my hope would be that we can find a warning calendar or something like that where we can have some of the kind of discussion we had a month ago, so staff can be brought on board to the understanding of some of the historical value and so forth, that then lets you start from the beginning with an understanding of the base as we see it sitting here. And I am in awe of what you have been able to bring to us, and I think it could not have been done better from a point of view of the time frame that we had in which to do this. But I don't think that the pressure that the staff has been ending up putting themselves under, and the commissioners as well, is a disservice to all of us. And so we've new staff, we've got fresh eyes. It's an opportunity to set a universal understanding. We are coming out of COVID, and like every other agency, we have had a tremendous staff turnover, and institutional memories are missing in every one of our partner organizations, as well as here. And we're trying to bring new people on and catch them up. And so I would just hope that we develop some processes as we're going through this so that we can do these things in a more deliberate way. It's not that we're ending up making bad decisions necessarily. It's just that at the pace, it's got to affect morale, it's got to affect teamwork, and it's got to make it difficult for staff to do their jobs. And I would just hope we use this as an opportunity to say, how can we do this so that it fits into our and incorporated into our daily workload, rather than having to respond and pull emergency team meetings from the various divisions to get the data that we need to make a recommendation. I would hope that that is something that we can look forward to and accomplish. And I'm not taking away anything from the recommendations that you are making, and I value them, and I value the effort that you went through to get us to this point of being able to make some kind of a decision. So I'm sorry, I know that was rather lengthy, but
Thank
I
you
feel
very much,
passionately
Commissioner
about it,
Simon.
and I feel passionately about our staff, and I feel passionately about the workload, and I feel passionately about maintaining the ability to do our best every time, because I think we do it in a remarkably competent way. And I thank you for the efforts that you continue to put into your work every day.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Simon. I do just want to note that, of course, when we brought this matter before the committee in April, we were afforded an opportunity for a very robust discussion. A lot of questions were raised at that time. And the committee did, while not making a decision in terms of supporting or not supporting, did advance the matter to the board. It was my decision to, instead of bringing the matter to the May board meeting, to afford the staff additional time to do additional due diligence so that we could also afford another opportunity to come before this committee. So the discussions have been ongoing for quite some time, and we benefited from the feedback from this committee in that first meeting, chose not to advance it to the May board meeting so that we could, again, have another opportunity to get your level of comfort with the recommendation, and therefore advance it in June. And so this has been an ongoing discussion, but this also was fine-tuned and honed based on the feedback that we did receive from the committee in April, and then the decision to not move forward, so that even the full commission would not feel pressure to make a quick decision. So we were able to map it out so that we would have until June to make a solid recommendation to the board. But your feedback is definitely appreciated. And of course, we will continue to strive to get ahead of timelines, to get information to you ahead of time. And also, of course, we experience what you've expressed publicly in terms of having to adjust to new staff and changes in staff. And so we're trying our best and we'll continue to. But thank you for the feedback. And I just wanted to acknowledge in terms of the timing and the sequencing, kind of why we decided to actually wait until June versus May to bring the matter before the board.
Yeah, no, and actually I wanted to express appreciation for that. I was going to say, because I know there was the option to go straight to the full board. And so I did appreciate coming back. And I guess, and I was going to ask some questions about some of the other stuff, but I think it's been discussed. I think we discussed a lot of it last month as well. So I won't prolong that. I did want to, again, expressing the appreciation that it has come back to us, understand some of the differences between what we were presented last month and what we're being presented today. I was not able to pull up last month's briefing here for some reason, but I had been looking at it at home, and I know, some of the numbers are different. It seemed like, and so I was trying to understand it. I had also thought that PNC had proposed both the non-taxable and taxable, or tax exempt and taxable options. And, some of the discussion last month was about, whether we could mix and match. I don't know what was determined about that. I also just wanted to understand, like, again, some of the differences. Are these fresher proposals, or why are the numbers a little different?
Yes, Commissioner Merkowitz, in terms of being able, your question about could one banker do the tax exempt and another do the taxable? The answer to that is yes, but it's not advisable because of the economics of it. To each investment banker, it would be advantageous to the second one, and you wouldn't know that until all the bonds are issued. And you wouldn't know the breakdown of tax exempt and taxable until the whole transaction took place. Therefore, they wouldn't know what their fees and what their other upside would be. Okay. And then to your first question, yes, we did attempt to do what we've been famously calling apples to apples comparison. Sometimes it was green apples to red apples, but nonetheless it was apples. And to even that out and give everyone the benefit of the same assumptions, particularly as it relates to the NOI.
I mean, even some of the debt numbers seemed different. You did break out this time HOC debt and county debt compared to senior debt, but some of those numbers were different as well.
Could you be more specific?
Well, again, I don't have the other packet in front of me. I was trying to pull it up, but this, I think the total amount of debt was somewhere in the vicinity of like 59,000, and this is closer to 57,000. I mean 59 million. This is closer to 57 million. So there was some different NOI. It was like 5.2 this time versus 5.4 last time, I think. So
the NOI difference is that for this iteration, we have removed what was previously shown as other income from debt sizing. Didn't want to necessarily count on that, so we reduced that to the 5.2. And I believe the difference you're talking about in the debt is that we made sure that it included the amount for PNC that takes into account the extension that we did in August, or did until August of this year.
I see. Okay. those were my only questions. I appreciate understanding that now.
I've one other question related then to the proposals. Does this anticipate there will be resources to make improvements to any of these properties that you determine need immediate attention?
Yes.
Wonderful. Because that was the other concern, and I felt that was intimated, but I wasn't sure I could, that my reading was accurate, so.
And Commissioner Markowitz, I would just add with regard to the numbers and how they've changed, they will likely change again because interest rates haven't been
That
determined.
I understand. Yeah.
Okay, good. And I would also add, Commissioner Simon, with regards to the comment about proceeds. We would like to, Chelsea and I have discussed what happens with residual proceeds. And we'd also like to have a further discussion on that. So, but there will be some residual proceeds. I want to confirm that.
Probably, at least initially, I would think it should be dedicated and reserved to these properties. So that it doesn't get into general fund and other things. I would hope we find a way to, if we're gonna refinance these, to
Understood.
keep them within the
There's definitely, and
right angles.
I anticipate coming back to the commission with a recommendation related to that. There are some fluctuations and impacts that we're experiencing operationally where we will need to, of course, even as we're thinking about the debt ceiling or how much reserves we have available to us to maintain operations with various challenges we're experiencing, there may be the need to have some flexibility up front with this funding source. Although I anticipate coming back to the board with a more comprehensive recommendation. We do have additional funding that has been allocated for our scattered sites that we also need to deploy that we've received from the county. So in thinking about the time frame in which we need to get those funds out the door, what funding we want to have tied to this source versus pull down and use the full funding that we have allocated from the county, we definitely want to prioritize that. So there's some other follow-up discussions that I anticipate having with the board related to this. And I will say that, of course, as you can tell from the financing plan, there are reserves that are allocated in terms of for these particular sites for ongoing capital improvements. Yes.
And I think the other glaring issue here is the vacancy rate among these units, and they really need attention. And again, staff turnover and so forth, I'm sure has had an impact. And so if it's not any one thing, it's the culmination of the economic climate, the COVID, everything put together, and it's affecting all of our partners as well. And that became very apparent to me when I was up at the cider mill event over the last weekend, and talking to some of the other county agencies that were present, and the impact of the loss of institutional memory there and through the turnover, that people are struggling and trying to catch up and understand what partners do and what we do as a partner agency to ULTA and code enforcement and other county departments. So we're all in this together. We're not alone. And I think we're in much better position than many of our partners. But we will get through this.
Pardon me.
Pardon me.
On the issues you raised about funds for rehab or modernization, we had, if I recall correctly, somewhat painful experience in terms of renovating some of the VPC 1 and 2. Wasn't the VPC 1 and 2 that we renovated, and found out how costly it was? I mean, that was, as I recall, somewhat painful. And it seems to me that that is a lesson in terms of why, following Commissioner Simon's suggestion, we need to seriously consider any proceeds being set aside to take care, because we also know that particularly this kind of property does have a significant expense when you have to go in and do rehab. So I would seriously suggest that that has to have some serious consideration, because it is going to come into play, and better to plan now than to have to come up to the commission later and say, oh, we need to have X millions of dollars, because we don't have enough in the replacement reserves for these. So if we've got the opportunity now to put something away, we ought to think about that.
Is there further discussion, or is someone ready to make a motion?
I will make a motion to support the staff's recommendations.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. We have arrived at that point, and thank you for all the work that it took to get us here.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
If there's nothing else to come before the committee, we stand adjourned.
Thank
Thank you
you.
again.
Thank you.